Before Christianity conquered Rome, another religion almost did. Not born in Jerusalem, not born in Rome, but in Persia. It was the faith of Mani, the prophet of light. His vision spread like wildfire. From the palaces of Persia to the deserts of Arabia, from the ports of Egypt to the mountains of China, missionaries carried his gospel farther and faster than any before. At its height, it touched kingdoms Rome could never tame. Some say nearly the whole known world, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, heard Mani's voice. But if he was so great, why have you never heard of him? Because Mani's story is dangerous. Too dangerous for Rome, too dangerous for Persia, too dangerous for the church that followed. He was the prophet who walked beside kings, who watched Rome kneel in defeat, who claimed to unite the truths of Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus in one final revelation. And for that, they erased him. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you'll see why Mani may have been the most dangerous prophet in history, and why his lost faith nearly toppled Rome itself. Who was Mani? A name erased from history books, but once spoken in whispers across empires. He was born in 216 CE, near Ctesiphon in Mesopotamia, the beating heart of Persia's Sasanian dynasty. From childhood, Mani felt himself set apart. Raised among a sect called the Elsasates, he was surrounded by visions, rituals, and teachings drawn from both Judaism and early Christianity. But Mani claimed something more. He said an angel appeared to him, the twin, his celestial double, and revealed that he was chosen to complete the chain of prophets. Zoroaster had spoken of light and truth. Buddha had spoken of liberation from suffering. Jesus had spoken of salvation. Mani declared himself the final link, the one who would weave all these revelations into a single, universal faith. He called himself the Apostle of Light. And unlike other sects that hid in caves and deserts, Mani did not whisper his truth. He proclaimed it openly. He wrote books. He painted images. The erasure, a scripture not only of words but of art, meant to teach through beauty. He sent missionaries east along the Silk Road, west into Roman territory, south into Arabia and India. His message was simple, yet cosmic. The world is a battlefield of two eternal forces, light and darkness. Human beings are sparks of light trapped in bodies of matter. Salvation is not through temple rituals or bloody sacrifices, but through knowledge, purity, and the liberation of the soul. And here was Mani's genius. He didn't reject the prophets who came before him. He embraced them. He told his followers, Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus were all messengers of light, but their teachings were incomplete. His mission was to finish what they began. Think about the boldness of that claim. In a world divided by rival faiths, Mani was saying, all of your truths come from the same source, and I am the one who holds the final piece. It was revolutionary. It was dangerous, and it spread like fire. Persia, under Shapur was at the height of its power. Shapur crushed Roman legions, captured emperors, and carved his victories into stone. And there at his court, Mani stood, not as a soldier, not as a noble, but as a prophet. He walked beside kings. He debated priests. He proclaimed his gospel of light in the very halls of empire. Imagine the scene. Rome's Emperor Valerian brought in chains before Shapur, a moment carved forever in the rock at Nakshi Rostam. And somewhere in those years, Mani teaching in the shadow of Persia's triumph, a prophet of light at the right hand of a king. This was no fringe mystic. This was a world prophet. And yet today his name is nearly forgotten. Why? Because Mani's vision was too big, too universal, too unifying. For priests who thrived on division, for empires that thrived on control, Mani was a threat they could not afford to tolerate. Before Christianity rose in Rome, Mani's faith could have become the world's first global religion. A faith stretching from the Mediterranean to the Great Wall of China. And for a time, it nearly did. Picture the year 260 CE. The Roman Empire, mighty and brutal, stretches from Britain to Egypt. Its legions march unchallenged across the world. And then Persia strikes. At Edessa, in the burning heat of Mesopotamia, Shapur the king of kings of the Sasanian Empire, shatters Rome's army. Tens of thousands of legionaries are slaughtered. And in a moment that Rome will never forget, Emperor Valerian himself is captured alive. No Roman emperor had ever been taken prisoner. None. Yet here he stands, broken and humiliated in the chains of Persia. On the cliffs of Nakhche-Rostam, Shapur carved the scene in stone. Valerian kneeling, Shapur towering above, Roman generals pleading at his feet. For centuries, every traveler who passed those cliffs saw Rome's humiliation frozen in rock. And in the shadow of this triumph, at the court of Shapur, stood Mani. Not as a warrior, not as a general, but as a prophet. Mani preached a gospel of light while Persia bathed in victory. Imagine the optics: Rome, humiliated, Persia, ascendant, and a new universal faith rising in its midst. The timing could not have been more explosive, because Shapur was not just a conqueror. He was a patron of ideas. Under his reign, Persia became a crossroads of philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and religion. Greek texts were translated into Middle Persian. Indian sages visited the court. And Mani's voice rang out among them, proclaiming that all wisdom, whether of Zoroaster, Buddha, or Jesus, found its fulfillment in him. For the first time, a prophet was not speaking from the margins of empire, but from its very throne room. Mani could debate priests, write scriptures, paint revelations, and do it all under the protection of the king who had brought Rome to its knees. To the followers of light, this was providence. God had raised up Persia as the shield of the new faith. If Rome had crucified Jesus, Persia would protect Mani. If Rome had silenced prophets, Persia would lift Mani's voice across continents. And for a moment it seemed unstoppable. Rome had fallen in battle. Mani had risen in glory. The Empire of Light and the Empire of Persia were aligned. But history is never so kind. For every king there are priests, and for every triumph there is jealousy. Mani's vision of a universal faith, one that would erase boundaries between religions, threatened the very order that made priests powerful. And though Shapur protected him, enemies were already circling. Still, that day at Edessa, when Rome's emperor bowed, the prophet of light stood in the halls of Persia. And in that moment, Mani's faith looked destined to conquer the world. After Edessa, after Rome bowed before Shapur, Mani's voice carried farther than ever before. Because Mani was not just a prophet for one tribe, one temple, or one kingdom. He saw himself as a world teacher. His words were written, painted, sung, and carried by missionaries along the arteries of empire. Imagine the Silk Road in the 3rd century, caravans heavy with silk and spices moving from China to Antioch, from India to Egypt. And alongside the merchants, Mani's disciples, the apostles of light, carrying scrolls, hymns, and the illustrated Arjang. From the sands of Arabia to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the valleys of India to the steppes of Central Asia, the message spread. The universe is a war between light and darkness, and every soul carries a spark of the divine that must be freed. And the world listened. In Rome, despite the hostility of Christian bishops, Manichaean communities formed, reading Mani's texts in Greek and Latin. In Egypt, Coptic fragments preserve his hymns. In India, his missionaries adapted his teachings to Buddhist language. In China, they translated his gospel into Chinese characters, calling him the Buddha of Light. For a moment, Mani's dream became reality, one religion for all nations. The file we studied makes a staggering claim, that at its height, nearly 85% of the known world was touched by Manichaeism. From Spain to China, his disciples preached, taught, and wrote. Even if we take that number as symbolic rather than literal, the truth remains. No faith before Islam spread so fast, so far, with such universality.
Why?
Because Mani's gospel was adaptable. He did not reject the prophets who came before him. He honored them. He told Christians that Jesus was the light. He told Zoroastrians that their fire was the light. He told Buddhists that nirvana was the release of light. Wherever he went, he showed people their own reflection in his truth. It was the first truly global religion, centuries before Christianity or Islam reached that scale. And Rome was terrified. Because this was not a hidden sect. This was not a scattered cult. This was a movement organized, missionary, universal. Rome had crucified Jesus and thought it had silenced the danger. But now Persia was exporting a prophet whose reach was even wider. Mani's disciples weren't rebels with swords. They were scholars with scrolls, missionaries with songs, artists with painted gospels. Their weapon was not war, it was light. And for ordinary people, it was irresistible. Mani offered a cosmic story that explained suffering, that gave meaning to evil, that promised liberation. His communities lived ascetically, refusing violence, refusing greed, devoted to purity. To peasants and princes alike, this was hope. For a time, it seemed Mani's light might eclipse all rivals. His name carried east and west, whispered in languages he never spoke, inscribed in scripts he never saw. But the brighter the light burned, the more fiercely the darkness prepared to strike back. At the core of Mani's vision lies a story as old as existence itself, the war between light and darkness. According to Mani, before time began, the realms of light and darkness were separate. The Father of Greatness ruled in purity, radiance, and peace. Opposite him, the King of Darkness seethed in chaos, lust, and violence. Then came the clash. Darkness invaded the realm of light. And in that cosmic collision, fragments of light were trapped in matter, scattered into the sun, the stars, the earth, and into us. Every human being, Mani taught, is a battlefield. Our souls are sparks of light, imprisoned in bodies of matter that belong to darkness. Every hunger, every desire, every cruelty is the voice of the dark. Every act of compassion, purity, or knowledge is the cry of the light within us. Salvation, then, was not found in rituals of sacrifice or the blood of animals. It was found in awakening, in knowing who you truly are, a being of light, and in living in such a way that the light within you could be freed. This is why Mani's followers lived with such discipline. The elect renounced meat, wine, sex, and wealth. They refused violence, for to spill blood was to entangle light deeper in matter. They fasted, they prayed, they sang hymns of radiance. Even their diet was symbolic. By eating fruit, they believed they were releasing the particles of light trapped in plants back toward the heavens. It was not just religion. It was cosmology. It was science wrapped in myth. A vision of the universe as a rescue mission, God himself working to gather the scattered sparks back into the kingdom of light. And notice the echoes. In Jesus' words, I am the light of the world. In Zoroaster's vision, the eternal war between Asha, truth, and Druj, the lie. In Buddhism, the path of liberation from suffering, the release of the soul from illusion. Mani's genius was to take these fragments and weave them into one grand tapestry. He told his followers all prophets saw part of the truth. But here, in the doctrine of light and darkness, is the whole picture. It explained why the world is beautiful and terrible at once. Why we long for goodness yet fall into corruption. Why kingdoms rise in splendor yet collapse in blood. Because the cosmos itself is at war. And in that war, every choice matters. Every kindness releases light. Every cruelty chains it deeper. Human history is not random. It is the theater of the greatest battle imaginable. To peasants crushed under empire, to philosophers searching for truth, to kings hungry for meaning, this was irresistible. Mani gave them not just religion, but a cosmic role. He told them, you are not pawns. You are fragments of divinity. Your life is the battlefield of eternity. That message lit hearts like fire. and it terrified the priests. Because a man who believes he carries God's spark cannot be controlled by temple taxes or imperial decrees. And so, even as the gospel of light spread, the forces of darkness prepared their counterstrike. But the brighter the light burned, the more fiercely the darkness struck back. Mani's faith had spread from the palaces of Persia to the villages of Egypt, from the caravanserais of the Silk Road to the whispering streets of Rome. Too many people were listening. Too many were leaving behind the old temples, the old sacrifices, the old priests. And when priests lose power, they always strike. In Persia, Shapur Moin had been Mani's shield. But kings do not live forever. When Shapur died, the throne passed to Bahram Bey, and Bahram was not a friend of Mani. He listened instead to the Zoroastrian Mobads, the fire priests whose authority Mani's universal gospel had threatened from the beginning. They told him, Mani is dangerous. Mani undermines the sacred order. Mani must die. And so the trap was sprung. In 276 CE, Mani was summoned to the court. He was accused of sorcery, of heresy, of crimes against the fire. He was chained, mocked, and, according to tradition, flayed alive. His skin was stuffed with straw and hung outside the city gates. The prophet who preached light died in darkness, betrayed not by Rome, but by the priests of his own land. His followers called it the Passion of the prophet Mani. Like Jesus before him, Mani died at the hands of both empire and priesthood. Like Jesus, his death was meant to be not only punishment, but erasure. And here is the irony. For once, Rome and Persia, empires locked in endless war, agreed on something. They both hated Mani. Rome branded his followers heretics, servants of Satan. Christian bishops denounced Manichaeism as the greatest threat to the church. St. Augustine himself, before he became a Catholic saint, had been a Manichaean for 9 years, and later spent his career attacking the faith he once followed. Persia, meanwhile, hunted Mani's disciples, burned their books, silenced their hymns. The fire priests could not allow their monopoly on light to be challenged. So the empire of light was crushed between two powers, Rome and Persia. Two enemies who for one brief moment found common cause in destroying Mani. And yet erasure was never complete. His scriptures were hidden. His songs whispered in caves. His missionaries carried the message further east, beyond the grasp of either empire. But in 276, Mani the man was gone. The prophet who stood beside kings, who watched Rome kneel, who claimed to unite the wisdom of the ages, was now a martyr, his body broken, his name condemned. The light had been struck, but the embers still glowed. Mani was gone. His body displayed in disgrace, his name cursed by priests, his followers hunted like criminals. But light cannot be killed so easily. Even as the Mobads of Persia and the bishops of Rome tried to erase him, Mani's words kept moving. His scriptures, written in Aramaic, Coptic, Middle Persian, were smuggled across deserts and hidden in caves. His painted gospel, the Archaeology, vanished from palaces but lived in whispers. The prophet who wrote with light and painted with truth. And his disciples, the hearers and the elect, scattered like sparks before the wind. Some fled east along the Silk Road beyond the claws of empire. Others sank underground in the west, keeping their hymns secret, their prayers whispered. Even in Rome itself, the light survived. One of the most famous saints in Christian history, Augustine of Hippo, was a Manichaean for 9 years. 9 years he walked in Mani's shadow, listening to the gospel of light and darkness, before he turned against it and embraced the Catholic Church. And yet, the very ideas he fought so hard to destroy, the war of good and evil, the corruption of matter, the longing for liberation, seeped into his writings and, through him, into the very fabric of Christian theology. Manichaeism also lived on in the East. Chinese texts called Mani the Buddha of Light. Uyghur princes along the Silk Road embraced his teachings, spreading them across Central Asia. Even in far-off caves in Turfan, in the deserts of western China, fragments of Mani's scriptures survived, buried in the sand for over 1,000 years until archaeologists rediscovered them in the 20th century. And in medieval Europe, echoes returned. The Cathars of southern France preached a dualism strikingly similar to Mani's. The world ruled by a dark power, salvation found in purity, violence rejected. The Bogomils of the Balkans sang of light imprisoned in flesh. To the Catholic Church, these were heresies. To history, they were the ghost of Mani returning. Everywhere his enemies cursed him. But everywhere his light kept flickering. That is the paradox of suppression. The harder empires tried to erase Mani, the further his gospel traveled. Like seeds scattered on the wind, it found soil in lands Rome and Persia could never reach. So while the man was dead, the faith survived. In hidden scriptures, in underground communities, in medieval heresies, in the very language of saints who condemned him. Mani had been erased from history books, but not from history itself. The light still glowed in the shadows. For Mani, truth was not only spoken. It was drawn, sung, hidden in codes. He knew that words alone could be twisted, burned, forgotten. So he created symbols, signs that could outlive empires. Take his very name, Mani. Some scholars trace it to Mani, jewel, shining stone. To his followers, he was the radiant gem, the spark of light made flesh. A prophet who did not just speak truth, but embodied brilliance. Then his sacred book, the Archaeology. Unlike any scripture before it, it was painted, not just written. Mani believed light itself could be captured in art. His illustrations showed the cosmic war, the souls of light trapped in matter, the path of return. For centuries after, Persian miniaturists and Chinese Manichaean scrolls echoed his style. Mani was not just prophet, he was called the painter prophet. His community, too, was coded. There were the elect, ascetics who renounced sex, wealth, meat, and violence. They lived as pure vessels, liberating light through every breath, every bite of fruit. And then there were the hearers, ordinary followers who supported the elect with food and shelter, sharing in their merit. Together they formed a living machine of salvation, a rhythm of daily life designed to release light from matter. And Mani's cosmology shimmered with symbols. Light and darkness were not metaphors. They were literal forces clashing across the cosmos. Mirrors symbolized the divine reflecting itself in creation. The twin, Mani's guiding angel, symbolized the higher self, the soul that sees beyond flesh. Even food became code. Fruit was sacred because it held imprisoned particles of light, waiting to be freed. Eating became a ritual of cosmic liberation. These symbols lived on long after Mani's enemies thought they had destroyed him. Medieval mystics spoke of sparks of light hidden in the world. Alchemists drew diagrams of dual forces, sun and moon, spirit and matter. Even in pop culture, the archetype endures, the cosmic battle of light and dark, Jedi and Sith, good and evil. Few realize it, but in these stories we are hearing an echo of Mani's ancient war. Because that was Mani's genius. He didn't just build a religion. He built a symbolic language. A way of seeing the world where every fruit, every flame, every star in the sky whispered the same truth. That the cosmos is broken, that light is imprisoned, and that every act of goodness is a step toward the great return. It is a language that could survive exile, persecution, even erasure. Because you cannot erase symbols. They return in dreams, in art, in stories. They haunt the imagination until the message rises again. That is why Mani was so dangerous. Because he didn't just teach a doctrine. He seeded a code that still speaks across centuries. And once you know the code, you begin to see it everywhere. For centuries after Mani's death, his enemies worked tirelessly to erase him. In Persia, the Zoroastrian priesthood declared his faith a blasphemy, his scriptures heretical. They burned his books, dismantled his communities, and painted him as a deceiver. In Rome, the Christian Church, now climbing toward power, branded Manichaeism the religion of the devil. Bishops thundered against it. Emperors outlawed it. Augustine himself wrote volumes to discredit the faith he once followed. And yet, the very ferocity of their attacks reveals the truth. Mani was too influential to ignore. His voice kept resurfacing. His symbols kept returning. His disciples kept whispering. But over time, the silence deepened. Manuscripts rotted. Hymns faded from memory. The Arjang vanished, leaving only echoes in later Persian art. It seemed as though the prophet of light had been swallowed by the darkness he warned of. For more than 1,000 years, Mani's gospel was presumed lost. His name survived only as a curse on the lips of his enemies. To history, he became a ghost, until the 20th century. In the dry caves of Turfan in western China, archaeologists uncovered a hidden library, fragile manuscripts written in Uyghur, Coptic, Middle Persian. Among them were hymns, psalms, and fragments unmistakably Manichaean. In Egypt, scraps of Coptic parchment emerged with Mani's words preserved. Suddenly, the silence cracked open. The prophet erased by empires spoke again. His teachings of light and darkness, his prayers, even his illustrations resurfaced after more than a millennium underground. Scholars pieced together fragments, comparing them to Augustine's polemics, to medieval echoes among the Cathars, to Chinese scrolls of the Buddha of light. Slowly, the erased faith began to breathe once more. And in that rediscovery lies the ultimate irony. The powers of Rome and Persia destroyed Mani twice, in life and in memory. Yet centuries later, their efforts failed. The light they tried to bury returned, carried not by missionaries this time, but by archaeologists with dust-covered hands. History's greatest deleted religion was found again. And in that moment, the story of Mani ceased to be tragedy alone. It became testimony that no empire, no priesthood, no erasure is ever final. The light always returns. Mani's story is one of the strangest in all of history. A child born in Mesopotamia who claimed visions of an angelic twin. A prophet who stood beside kings, who watched Rome's emperor kneel in defeat. A teacher who united the voices of Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus into a single gospel of light. For a moment, his voice stretched from the Mediterranean to the Great Wall of China. A global faith before the world even had a word for global, and then erased. Hunted in Persia, condemned in Rome, cursed in the very texts that preserved his memory. His body destroyed, his books burned, his name spat as heresy. Yet still, he survived. In fragments of parchment, in whispers of heretics, in hidden scrolls buried beneath the sands of Asia. Until one day, centuries later, the prophet erased by empires rose again, his voice echoing from forgotten manuscripts. What does that tell us? That truth cannot be silenced forever. That light, once scattered, will always find a way to return. That the story of humanity is not only the story of empire and power, but of sparks of light refusing to die. If Mani had not been erased, the dominant religion of our world might not be Christianity. It might not be Islam. It might have been the faith of light. Imagine how differently human history would look if Mani's vision had prevailed. That is why his name was struck from history. That is why his memory was buried. And that is why now his story matters more than ever. Because the cosmic war Mani spoke of, light and darkness, truth and the lie, is still with us. It plays out in our politics, our technology, our hearts. The battlefield is not gone. It is us. So the question is not only, who was Mani? The real question is, which side of the war are you on? If his gospel had reached 85% of the known world once, it can reach us again, through story, through memory, through the light still flickering in every human being. The erased prophet is speaking again, and the world is listening. Comment light versus darkness if you believe Mani's story deserves to be remembered, and if you want me to uncover the next hidden empire of faith. Because this story, like the light, has only just begun.